channel is on Sirius XM. Listen live on channel 114 now. From the world headquarters of Fox News, it's the Kelly File with Megyn Kelly.
First they were kidnapped, now they're converted? Video surfacing today of 130 or so young schoolgirls, many Christian, dressed in Muslim garb and chanting loyalty to Allah. These would be roughly half of the girls held hostage by a terror group for almost 3 weeks now. One of the terrorists appearing in the video to say that the young girls had been liberated. The effort to find the girls getting global attention, including a push from First Lady Michelle Obama, who shared a Mother's Day message about her outrage, but did not mention the group's Islamic extremist views. The ongoing threat to women's rights in parts of the Muslim world is the subject of the documentary Honor Diaries, a film that features Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Islamist extremists have sentenced Ms. Ali to die for her outspokenness against violence in the Muslim world, but she will not be silenced by threats. I spoke with her about this new video just a short time ago.
It took us a long time to get interested in this cause because we are so determined to separate the outcome, the kidnappings, the violence, the rape, the forced conversions from its ideological basis.
We don't want to touch it.
We don't want to touch it. It's not only us. It's the case in Nigeria. It's the case in many African places. I lived in Kenya. I grew up in Kenya. And there's this determination. We listen to many well-meaning Muslims who say, please, it has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do with the Sharia. It has nothing to do with the Quran. It's an aberration. And what we are seeing time and time and time again is, sadly, it's not an aberration.
Explain that, though, because we had somebody on the program recently who was talking about the difference in her mind. She wrote a book about it, between Shariaism and regular Islam. And she was saying those two things are very, very different. And that speaks to, you know, the Muslims worldwide who are peace-loving, who say Shariaism, Islamists, you know, these jihadists, they have nothing to do with us.
I grew up in a Muslim household. I grew up in a Muslim community. I remember distinctly as a teenager when we just used to be regular Muslims, and when things started to change and members of our own community started to preach. They called it da'wah. And what they were preaching was hostile to women. It was religiously intolerant. And in those early stages, none of us stood up to the preachers to tell them what you're saying is wrong. We didn't say that, because they were quoting from the Quran. If you preach that women should be covered from head to toe, that they should be locked up, and then eventually you have a large enough fellowship and you execute it, that yes, it is part and parcel of our moral makeup, our religion. And it is the challenge for Muslims today to recognize that once they do that, they can stop these preachers before they get to that level of terror.
Now, you've come under fire because you've been a harsh critic of Islam in the past, and you know, in your defense, your father tried to marry you off to a cousin, a forced marriage. You underwent genital mutilation. I mean, these things are serious and obviously have had their effect. And this is the reason why Brandeis University denied you the right to speak, because you've been a critic of Islam. Nonetheless, you wanted to call attention to violence against girls in the Muslim world. And then we see this. In the wake of this, we have the First Lady who's making a call for attention to these girls, which is good, but she doesn't mention in her radio address the fact that the girls are Christian and their captors are these radical jihadists. And is that something we need to understand what's happening here?
We need to understand that. If we don't understand that, if we don't acknowledge, and I think a lot of us understand it, which we're not willing to come out and say it in public, then we won't understand anything about the blasphemy laws in Pakistan and what's happening to girls and women in Pakistan, whether they're Christian, belong to religious minorities, or whether they're Muslim.
Because it's not just this terror group, Boko Haram.
No, it's all across Africa. It is in South Asia. It's even in Europe. So when you convince young men that it is okay to kidnap girls and sell them into slavery, and you understand that they're doing this through a conviction, they think they're doing something right. They say, we've liberated these girls. Mm-hmm. You have to understand that level of conviction. You have to understand that somehow it is derived from Islam unreformed. I think there is a possibility for Islam to be reformed. I think the opportunity is right here. But I think it all begins with acknowledging that there is something wrong in the first place.
Last question for you. Several Muslim groups have come out and denounced Boko Haram, this terror group. The Islamic Society of North America and the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, which includes organizations like CARE, among many others. What do you make of that? Because sometimes they've been criticized for being too slow to condemn. They've at least, with their words, condemned this group.
Well, with their words, I would say, okay, that's a first step, but I'm not convinced, because they, even in their denunciations, they've called Boko Haram an aberration. They've called them, you know, a scam group in a country of scams. You know, that still means that they are in that state of denial. It has nothing to do with Islam. If it has nothing to do with Islam, then they're not going to reform anything. For those girls, it doesn't mean nothing.
Thank you so much for being here. We'll continue to follow it.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for having me.
She's a brave woman. Joining me now, Congressman Mike Rogers. He's chairman of the House. Joining me now, Congressman Mike Rogers. He's chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and a former FBI agent. Good to see you, sir. And so she is a brave woman, because that's a difficult subject to speak out on, especially when there's a fatwa on your head. Is there a reason that the connection between this faction of Islam is not discussed more? In other words, the First Lady got criticized for not specifically referencing what kind of group we're talking about here.
Well, I mean, absolutely. And if you look at when the Americans arrived in Afghanistan, Megan, it was against the law to teach your daughters how to read, right? So that we've been dealing with this since 2000 and 2001 directly in the United States. And that belief is rooted in some form of Islam. And what we've had a terrific difficulty in doing is getting imams to moderate their preaching on Fridays to their congregations. And that has to happen. And Islam has to take ownership in these kinds of activities, because you find it in Nigeria, you find it in Cameroon, you find it in Libya, you find it in Yemen, you find it in Afghanistan, now you're finding it in Iraq. This obviously isn't an aberration, it's a problem that they need to deal with.
What do you make of the fact that some of these Muslim groups have come out and you know, at least on paper, condemned this Boko Haram? Is that meaningful, or is that cover?
Well, I think it's a good start, but it's only cover if it doesn't continue. If this is just one event, and of course this got national attention and everybody's doing the hashtag on it, that's great, except we have women in Afghanistan that need the same care and attention that the rest of these young girls need. Same with Yemen, same with the other places. I mean, we're getting ready to walk away from the women of which we've asked to participate in society in Afghanistan. What a stain on our national character. It's going to happen in Nigeria if we do that. It's going to happen in other places around the world. And let me
ask you about that, because Ayaan Hirsi Ali had her honorary degree revoked from Brandeis, and she had her invitation to speak at commencement revoked as well, because she's been a harsh critic of Islam in general. But she's been fearless in talking about violence against women in the Muslim world. She's one of the main ones who points out what happens to little girls in places like Afghanistan. Should American universities be shutting that speech down? It's a very dicey subject, even if you've made, because in essence you criticize Islam to some extent when you point out what happens with honor violence.
Well, candidly, Megan, I don't understand when universities shut speech down from someone like this who has the courage to stand up and say there is violence against women. There is a path for reform. It's not like she's condemning Islam in total. She's saying that there is an opportunity to reform Islam, or at least moderate its position on how the religion, and mainly how it teaches young men to treat women in the religion in places like Boko Haram, or Al-Shabaab, or Al-Qaeda, or in the Taliban. And I think that's her voice is incredibly valuable as we try to understand those differences. And my argument is there should be more people from Islam, more imams, joining her call for this moderation of Islam. If they really do believe that this is wrong, what Boko Haram is doing, then we shouldn't stop there. It has to be a holistic approach and start pushing back. Otherwise, we're losing this. More Al-Qaeda affiliates, more behavior just like this is on the horizon if we don't stand up. And again, I'm disappointed in the university for not allowing her to speak and allowing her voice to be heard in something that I think is as serious as you see with these 300 girls who are now captive, being sold as slaves, being married off, Some we don't know where they're at.
Right. Turns out she had a lot to say on an important issue. Great to see you, sir. Thanks for being here. Mike
Thanks,
Rogers.
Megyn.
Well, coming up, the Benghazi terror attack could